ideal, perhaps, for what you're talking about, is that your new vertical ecology must be the buildings around it are all each a -1. If you're talking about relationships, this also is an idea that each new skyscraper, each new vertical ecology that you insert, the organisms and the relationships are actually in relationship to 4 existing skyscrapers. So you never think of putting up a tall building without thinking about the 4 adjacent tall buildings that are already there. And those are already operating as a -1.
This gets back to, I think, conversations we've had before about, again, this partnership, right? And so the ecology, so that's one part, that I guess there could be nesting ecologies under this, right? So you've got this local ecology, and then if you think of it replicated, that's at least an attitude and proposal, that's position that you're taking for, you know, this, your thesis project.
Yes.
That you could imagine it having this role. Now, it doesn't mean you have to figure, you'll be able to figure everything, figure the whole thing out, but I think this is the attitude that's buried in there, at the sort of heart of this is a key question. And I think the other thing too is that, you know, whereas I have to agree with Ralph, you know, when you start talking about the mountain bikers and everything, I'm thinking, okay, you know, that's this kind of reductionist view. I mean, my feeling is that whatever the configuration emerges, that it shouldn't stand in the way, I guess, of what we do now, what we might do in the future. And so that's why it's difficult, it's elusive in that sense. But I think the fact that you are going to explicitly acknowledge that there has to be this evolutionary or evolvable component, evolvable aspect to what you're proposing, really responds to that very directly, at least from my point of view. So it's a challenge.
What about the axonometric as a generator concept?
I don't understand that at all.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
I saw some, quite a few glassy eyes. I'm like, oh.
I have no idea what that means. Tell me what it means. Axonometric as generator.
Old way, slice, do it in 2 dimensions, repeat as necessary. New way, rotate it, still do the bubble diagrams, but then focus on relationships all in 3D. This relates to this, how, straight lines.
Well, when you were describing it to me, you used kind of the run-sen as like a basic illustration.
That's a start, yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's obviously more complicated, but that's what he used to describe it to me. Because, like, when you go into the Renaissance Center, like, there's all these, like, levels, but they're all kind of connected. Like, there's like a space that's community, like, communal to all of them. And it's a lot more open, and then you have the shops, and you have the movie theater, you have all this stuff there, and then that's multi-use, too. So it's a basic, but that's kind of the start.
Well, as I'm getting into the design part, you know, Berman, they discussed this concept of a section as a generator. You know, we just slice through the building, and that's how we can show how all these relationships between the people on top floor and the bottom floor, and anywhere in between can start connecting. The reality is that it's still a flat, I mean, it's just plan, only it's rotated 90 degrees. So in my mind, it doesn't address, it's similar to Tom Lee's approach, where you just take something, rotate it, and expect the best to happen. So as I'm starting to look at, well, how do I actually design one of these structures and all these different relationships? I mean, I had a shift approach just on how to connect all these things. And the axonometric jumps in. It's something that hasn't really been addressed much. I was really surprised it was hard to find discussions of designing in 3 dimensions outside of the computer. And even though, I mean, we all know how to design in 3 dimensions, but just to actually sit down and do this quickly for such a large structure poses quite a challenge.
Or not. I mean, if I understand correctly, you're saying you want a form of representation that will allow you to look at the most pressing issues.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you could make some actual 3-dimensional tower models with stuff to represent very specific programs or performance-related, space-related stuff, and you just put it in a tower form. But I could actually see that as being totally fun. Like you say, okay, this week, all I'm going to do is make 10 skyscraper models, they'll all occupy the same amount of, vertical height, 1,000 feet high and whatever. Doesn't matter about the form, it's about the stuff that you put in there and what it represents. And so you're thinking three-dimensionally from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because you have to make something that's three-dimensional. And if axonometric representation or axonometric thinking also is another mode in which you can draw or model three-dimensionally, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. That still doesn't give you the content, but it definitely gives you a way of thinking about content that might be very productive.
That's true.
Section, I think the section is okay. There's nothing wrong with it inherently. It tells you certain things. I think the plan is the least useful drawing or mode of representation because it tells you absolutely nothing. But I think also the context that you consider, and I would say this is a physical context,
Yes.
meaning it's an urban skyscraper next to other existing urban skyscrapers. This one is from 1930, this one is from 1950, this one's from 1970, this one's from 1990, you're at 2010, is that every 20 years? Not 2010, 2012 now, whatever. That gives your thought a very explicit context, not an infinite general ether, but a very explicit context.
Yeah, and I think, again, maybe the flaw in sort of the way that was presented, I mean, we've talked about the idea of plan and section versus axonometric. And really what you're talking about is reliance primarily on two-dimensional modes of investigation versus three-dimensional modes. I would posit, though, that you have to move into four. That now there's the temporal issue and the temporal dimension. I think particularly if you're going to talk about an ecology which is never static.
No.
So how do you model, investigate, discuss an ecology in 4 dimensions?
Yeah.
And you can use any of a number of tools to do this. It doesn't have to be an axonometric. It doesn't have to be a physical model. It doesn't have to be a parametric model. It could be, it could be video. It could be any mixture of things. And I think that, again, as in, if we're going to start talking about investigative tools, I really think that a lot of what you're getting at with this is talking about networks of increasing complexity. And that being the case, I think your tools have to allow you to deal with multiple complexities.
A little pause here.
No, it's fine. 8 minutes left.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the temporal aspect of this is that it's not just networks of increasing complexity, because we're going to be looking at new communication, new energy, energy consumption monitoring, new technologies for materials, etc. That sort of things we can't even anticipate. But that's also loaded over things that are pretty eternal. It has to do with people and their needs and how they respond to each other. That changes a lot more slowly, I suppose. So the temporal, when you think about the modeling aspect, it's going to be taking into consideration, I would think, the fast, medium, and slow sort of flows of human activity within this building. And that, when you think about in terms of the possibilities for physical modeling in particular, how you begin to sort of understand the anatomy, the sort of organic, living, volatile human anatomy of spaces required or spaces desired within the structure of the building. Those two things coming together can be really interesting. I get that you're looking for something that is more communicative back to you in terms of the three-dimensionality for design and analysis. But it also means that, do you have something in mind that you're designing toward, I guess. And about the Rensen, I've heard that also described as one of the most confusing buildings spatially.
To you.
Well,
It's just stupid.
It's really pretty. I mean, the last time I was in there, I was just kind of like looking around, going like, yeah, you see these curious faces.
Shock and awe.
You don't know what, yeah, any of it it's
But
about.
you don't know how to get there.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I
like,
see a person right there, I cannot get there.
exactly, you know, so,
In a vertical ecology, you could.
well, right, and I think that's the thing, that you have all these different streams, sense of navigability, and the things you can ignore and bypass, and things you know you must take, and
Yeah.
so that's, again, that kind of richness and complexity that you have in the horizontal environment. And again, good examples and bad examples like everything else, but that would be embedded, I guess, in your main objectives of how to create a really good one. And there's going to be a mix, I think, of kind of repetition in that, so there'll be some of the plan-generated stuff, but also these moments where, again, the interstitial becomes really important, and this idea, too, of can there be an evolutionary component, a mutability that's built into that as part of design? I don't know, and you may just set
Design.
that aside, you know.
As Margaret was talking, something came to mind, a weird association, but a few years ago there was an exhibit at the Detroit Science Center. It was a traveling exhibit about the human body. I don't know if any of you saw
Oh,
that.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they would do things like they would take a cadaver and they would inject a resin that would fill every single blood vessel. And then they would dissolve the body and then encase this network of blood vessels. They would do things like take a body and they would slice it, and then, stretch it out across a room and all this. And I was thinking of that particularly because of the idea that, the human body has, a structural system, it has a nervous system, it has a circulatory system, a respiratory system, all this. And that, maybe part of your investigations are not necessarily about saying, I'm going to have this space, this space, this space, but I need to map this system. And now I need to map this system and do it four-dimensionally and start seeing, okay, now how do all these together become an ecosystem? I'm not sure exactly the means by which you would do that. And that's...
Oh, I think it's easy.
To me, that's one of the fun parts of my job, is I get to throw stuff like that out there and let you figure it out.
No, I think it's great. I mean, I think, again, this is perhaps the best and the simplest context you can start with, which is whatever you do is always in relationship to a couple of big existing skyscrapers.
Yeah.
It's going to happen below grade and above grade. Then you got to look at everything below and everything above. That the insufficient functioning systems of the existing buildings and this new building all have to now interrelate. So we will, this is more like a rhizomatic biological entity where the genetic DNA, the intake and outtake is all shared as opposed to being autonomous. The difference between animals having their own autonomy and what is it, poplar trees, or what are the rhizomatic?
They clone, sort of, they come up
Well,
part of them.
yeah, basically it's, what is the largest organism, is that in Michigan?
It's a
Fungus.
Fungus, yeah, so it's
Yeah.
more of a fungal approach, not animal approach.
All right, I'm going to pause that for a second so we can swap.
Circumstance right now, the
Right.
tape, I'm sure is much better.
Part 2. All right.
So I guess one of my questions is, it would be fascinating.
No, it's on.
Oh, it's on?
Yeah, that's what I looked at. As
Right.
well, I want to see myself. I'm cute.
Well, this whole, the rhizome idea, all these connections, so this question of life cycle that you've been really fascinated with. So this would be one way to envision, sort of the new element, having this supercharged, cutting edge ability to address life cycle. And then the way it connects to the older members, its older neighbors, extends their life
This is a
cycle.
neat idea.
And then stepping back, you see this possibly, this kind of seeding of the new element and spreading out throughout an existing cityscape. So I guess what I'm interested in too then is will your thesis really focus on that sort of framework approach, you know, a kind of systemic approach, or will this get down to a degree of specificity where we could know what its impacts might be for the human experiential, the above ground. So not just in terms of performance, like, oh yeah, look at the energy bill, great, you know, be quiet. But I mean,
So
does this
far.
translate, yeah, spatially ultimately to a user, and whether or not the thesis would have at least a chapter that deals with scenarios for use. I mean, Ralph, you thought it was a real red herring, the idea of the human programming. I agree that you can't pin it down. I mean, that's the point. The building should be such that it's not going to be, it's not going to live and die in its ability to be a monoculture.
That's true.
You know, it's going to just empty out at some point, and then we're stuck with it. The idea that it is able to accommodate a variety of uses now and in the future, and so not naming them, or at least, I don't know, putting it out there in such a way that it is open-ended is
Yeah. No, it's-
more successful.
Well, it's like looking at the interchangeable, like the Nagin capsule tower. And I've seen not only the obvious defects that have come from that fairly recently, but also other theses looked at skyscrapers as just interchangeable components. And you know, they're like, oh, we can network by just taking out the floor. And basically the whole building becomes earth rail. It doesn't exist. I mean, you can take apart any part and make it into something new. And the question is, well, why? And the only reason is I've taken the programmatic, let's say the relationship approach, driving the design, is one, it's easier, you know, but it gives solidity to what you're trying to build. You know, it has a reason, it has a rhyme, it has a purpose. And even though it might, you know, like be useless in the future, at least it's something to go off of. Versus, I mean, why would you switch from a grid skyscraper? It's more efficient, it's easier to use, it's easier to navigate, we understand how to build it very well. You know, but I mean, parametric design isn't that impressive as to shift that entire methodology. And that's kind of the weird part, is looking at it from, you know, all of these different systems is awesome. But the interchangeability, I mean, that's...
Yeah, I think that's also the, I mean, it's the same oxymoron of a mobile home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's certainly interesting and may have some minor application that's relevant.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I understand correctly, you want to cut to the heart and soul of you know, the future of the skyscraper,
Yeah.
and how it can be a vertical ecology in a positive sense. And I think that you haven't done this yet, but I think starting with simple things like energy and waste. Every skyscraper deals with that on one level or another. And I think that the challenge is, you know, most of them deal with a -1 or worse, you know, -10 or -20. How can you get the skyscraper to be a positive? So that means that it's going to generate more energy than it uses. And, you know, when it comes to waste, I want to know what even happens with something like waste, because the idea is that all the waste in a skyscraper disappears and goes somewhere else in the city.
Goes away.
Yeah.
Forever.
There is a way.
Yeah. You know, I think the energy is the number one importance, but I think the whole waste thing is another, because it's a huge consumer of water. The energy thing is so important because of the profound amount of energy these things end up using, but also the untapped potential. We talked about it, I guess, last time we met as part of the conversation here. They wrote it down here. It's like, okay, when you're thinking about vertical ecology, well, okay, what works well with gravity or without gravity is air. So how are you taking advantage of the difference in air 1,000 feet above the ground that the skyscraper, only the skyscraper really can address? No, certainly no other building type can address air 100 feet or more above the ground. So, you know, have we seen skyscrapers that do anything with the air? All they're trying to do is get a structural system to resist the wind force.
Yeah.
But how many actually use the wind force to some effect?
And we certainly brought this up in our discussions too, about make the verticality essential to the functioning of this new thing, this new entity, but make it, I think, beneficial beyond, well, you get to pay more rent because you've got a better view.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been
Right.
economic.
Well, and this gets back, so I got to say my tagline on tape here, but again, making the skyscraper, a sustainable skyscraper, earn its keep. And I think part of this might be this sense of vertical zoning. So it's not so much about, well, how do we get the mountain bikers, up and around and around, but maybe there's, again, this sense that as you get to a certain height, maybe there are whole zones that, I think about the horse trading for zoning. It's like, okay, we get 20 more floors if you give us a public open space.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a zone where it's all sort of either dealing with the urban agriculture plus the waste conversion through here.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a whole zone where, it's not where the people live or they work, but it's a system that is inherent and essential to the building and the support of its neighbors. But then you can go above that, so again, that's where you have a collective entertainment, a spectacle, recreational piece up there that draws people above. So there's a sense that, there's a really great way to use this verticality. Even as you go taller, that doesn't, that goes against inherently this kind of monoculture approach we have, where every floor just needs to be familiar and usable to, a generic sort of human occupation. That you put a few more toilet rooms in or take a few out, but that really that ecological analysis becomes.
Well, the incentives as well. Imagine that. It's like, well, you did this really well, we'll give you more height.
Yeah, right. But then it feeds back.
Yeah, and
right?
if you keep doing better, more height, keep going up, we'll let it.
Because I know you guys talked about the idea that they were the kind of like a modular approach as you moved vertically.
Yeah.
Is there a self-contained, like a number of floors that sort of lend themselves to kind of like a little loop, within the big loop?
I don't know about energy